Good morning, brothers and sisters, young people, friends. How are you all feeling this morning? We heard a bit of raucous last night. It was fine, but I assume that there's not much sleep that's been had by some. Is this correct? It's correct, right. Yeah, so I'm going to do my best to try and keep you with me this morning. Last night I heard singing. There was a happy birthday, right? And it's an interesting thing because my mum, 4 days ago, it was my mum's birthday 4 days ago, and she would have turned 73. However, she died on the 9th of December last year of a combination of Lewy body dementia and what's called rigid Parkinson's disease. And when she was young, she had a debilitating condition called ankylosing spondylitis. So my mum was a very unhealthy person all of her life, and it was very difficult as she had us kids. And we spent a lot of time in the Sash Ferguson memory ward where my mum was there for 3 years. And I learned a lot about grief and suffering during those years. And to see someone that you love fade away like that is it's very difficult. I was going to play a song that I wrote to you, but the tech was too hard to play. Now, at my mum's memorial service, knowing that the speech would be quite emotional, I just asked for people to do this thing just to sort of help us all get through it. And it was, I got everyone to say, happy, happy, joy, joy. And for some reason, it just helped. So if there is a moment where things do get a bit emotional, can we practice it? Like happy, happy, joy, joy. If we all say it together, it actually really works well. So on the count of 3, happy, happy, joy, joy. And maybe happier and more joyful. Happy, happy, joy, joy. If you can remember that, that would be really good. So at the beginning of James, he drops what we would call a theological bombshell, really. And he writes, count it all joy when you meet trials of various kinds. Now, in other translations, it says, consider it great joy. Consider yourselves fortunate. Reckon it nothing but joy when you meet trials of various kinds. Why? Well, that's the question, isn't it? Why? Because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. And allow perseverance to finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Now, James takes what we would call a very pragmatic approach to trials. He's very realistic. He's very sensible in the way that he articulates his truth bomb about trials and suffering. He's very factual and matter-of-fact about it. If we don't already know it, James wants us to have an answer to the conundrum of why trials exist in our life and why we can be thankful and actually joyful even in the face of them and during them. But here's the thing, this should only be a conundrum. This problem should only be like a head-scratching moment for people who do not know God. It's only a confusion for those who do not know God, who doubt the reality of God's existence, or for individuals who completely diminish the power and the preciousness of faith. That's who it's a conundrum to. That's who it's to a confusion to, but not those who believe in God. Because all believers know, we know, that there is purpose and meaning to suffering. It's actually Christianity 101. It's one of the great pillars and banners of our faith that we actually hold up high. Because if God is not real, then it's impossible to give an answer in this life that is not nihilistic, bleak, or morbid. So we hold this banner up high. That's what we do. And that's why James is just so upfront about trials in his letter. This is the first thing he talks about. For you know it in your heart, that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. It's something we are supposed to know as followers of Christ. It's not a confusion. And yet it's the first thing he writes about in his letter because he knows a thing or two about doubt, doesn't he, James? He knows how we all struggle sometimes to see the point and the purpose in the things that we suffer. We have these patches in our life where we lose sight of our Lord Jesus Christ, the captain of the ship, the captain of the boat, because the waves around us seem so ginormous. They seem too big, they seem too scary, and they're difficult to manage. We sometimes feel like we're actually drowning in just a sea of doubt and confusion sometimes. And God doesn't want us to be confused about this issue. James does not want us to be in any doubt about this issue. And sometimes we're in that sea of doubt and we just don't know how long we can tread water for in those waters. And so James wants us all to get to the point. This is sort of the punchline. James wants to get us to the point where we can truthfully and we can joyfully say, Lord, I know for certain that without trials in my life and without the testing of my faith, it would be impossible for me to truly know you, God, and to truly love you, God, with any depth or with any meaning at all. I started reading this book called Finding God. I don't know if any of you have read this book. You've read this book. And there was this incredible dedication at the start of this book. It was to a mentor by the name of Dr. Charles Smith. And I'll never forget this. And actually, at first, I didn't really know what to make of it. This is what it says. To the memory of Dr. Charles Smith, a mentor who prayed for his cancer to return, if it would bring him closer to God. And in the last year, he found God in a measure he had never known before, and then he died of cancer. See, it works. So when I read this, I thought, is it actually right to pray a prayer like this? It seemed a bit arrogant or selfish or something, or masochistic, or perhaps a little inconsiderate of his loved ones, his family. Or maybe it was just me being challenged by a concept that I'm actually not really prepared to face in my own life. It made me ask the question, well, what am I prepared to sacrifice in order to find God in a measure that I've never ever experienced before? What lengths am I prepared to go to? And so Dr. Charles, he knew in his heart that when he was down and out with his cancer, his entire perspective changed. His dependence on his God ignited. His prayer life, it just increased exponentially. His relationship with God got to a level, a measure like he had never known before. And he was actually inspired by a passage in the Bible. He was inspired by Psalm 90. And it says, teach us, it's actually part of the Song of Moses. Teach us to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. What a thing to ask God, isn't it? What a thing to ask God. Has this ever been something that you've prayed for? Has this been something that I've prayed for? Teach me to number my days. Well, how's God going to do that? Remind me, God, that I'm not invincible, because I don't want to waste or take for granted a single day in my life. Yet many of us live, especially when you're young. I was young once. When we're young, it's very difficult to be conscious of our mortality. We're not really thinking about the day of our death, are we? We don't think about that reality, and yet God, he knows the number of each and every one of our days, how many days we have left according to his plans. He knows exactly how many beats we have left in our heart. And Moses is saying, I need to be, God, help me to be aware of the preciousness of life so I can present to you a heart of wisdom. Our heart is like an offering. The question is what is that heart looking like inside that chest of yours, in my chest? What does it look like? Is it a heart of stone? Or is it something that God is able to really work with? Because we might say, well, what can I offer God? What is there that he could possibly want of me? David says, you do not desire a sacrifice, or I would give you one. I would offer one. You don't want a burnt offering. The sacrifice you desire is a broken spirit. You will not reject a broken and repentant heart, O God. This is the heart of wisdom. That's what God wants. If you're wanting to know, he wants your broken and repentant hearts. A heart that is willing to deliver over to him your trust. In spite of all of your doubts and all of your insecurities. For us to say, my heart is messed up. My thoughts are messed up. I say and do things that are messed up. And I don't want to be messed up anymore. I want to change. I want to have a clear conscience. I want purpose and meaning in my life. I want a life with you, God, in it. And our God says, yes, I am absolutely willing. And this is the sacrifice that brings joy to the holy heart of God and to his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ. Because God takes our repentant, broken heart into his loving, eternal hands, and he gets to work on it. He starts a miraculous work of repair and transformation. My dad was a potter. You probably know this, some of you. And as a little kid, I used to watch Dad. And he was there. Every day I used to watch him. And he used to make pots. And he used to start off by making a big pot. Luke, son, I'm going to make a vase today. And then there's grit and there's air pockets and bubbles. And he's like, no, we can't do that. We're going to have to trim that down. And he ends up with an egg cup. Sometimes that's us. God is working with us to repair. We might think we're something when God has got a plan of what vessel he wants us to be. But I would much rather be an egg cup in the kingdom of God than to think that I'm some sort of a Ming vase. The only way our hearts can become malleable is through the testing of our faith. The testing of our faith. This is the wisdom of God. When I first started looking at the book of James, I used to go to a cafe in Harndorf in South Australia, for those that don't know it. It was called Cafe House, a German. And anyway, I was been working there for some time, just on my laptop, and there's a waitress that kept on, yes, would you like coffee? Would you like, and I was, yes, coffee, yeah. And she, one day she just came up to me and she said, and her name is Alicia, and she came up to me and said, what on earth are you working on? You're always here with your laptop. What are you doing? And I said, oh, actually, I'm actually working on a series of talks I've got to do, and this is quite a few years ago, on the book of James. It's a book in the Bible. It's a letter in the Bible. And I said, actually, Alicia, I've got a question for you. And she goes, oh, yeah, what? And I said, it says here, count it all joy when you enter into trials of various kinds or every kind. I said, what do you think about that? And she goes, oh, whew, whew. I said, have you like experienced any trials before in your life? And she was probably, she's about 30, 35 years old. And she goes, oh, actually, yeah. Yeah, when I was younger, my 4-year-old son, he got crushed in a boating accident, and he died in my arms. And then my partner left me, and then soon after that, my mum died. And I'm like, and we got chatting, and we talked about that, and I had no answers, just listened. But guess what? She comes along to the meetings now. Thank you. She comes along to the meetings based on a conversation about the worst possible trial that you could go through. All right. So I've been through a few things, a few trials, and I continue to go through various trials in my life, but I'm hyper aware of the fact that many of you who are in this room are probably going through trials right now, or have been through the most immense trials in your life. Perhaps that make my trials look like a picnic. And I actually look out in the world, and I've encountered stories of unimaginable loss and suffering that I don't really have words for. Stories of cruelty, calamity, and injustice that just make my head shake. You know, when God sent Adam and Eve out into, I guess, the environment that he did, and they became mortal and they had to endure trial, you know, one thing that he wasn't expecting, or he was not looking for, or that there was no expectation that this should happen, because yes, there would be trial, there would be suffering in nature, there would be disease, there would be all sorts of weaknesses that would happen, but the one thing that should never happen is human cruelty to each other. You notice that? See, the thing is that we can cope, even though it's devastating, with all the other things, but the thing that we cannot cope with, that we cannot deal with, is the things that we do as humans to each other. But I've also encountered these humbling anomalies where I have just made the wrong assumptions about people who on all accounts have got every reason to feel completely ripped off and bitter in life, but are full of joy. of hope and possibility. And so through the words of James, I believe that our God is willing and wanting us and expecting us to trust in him in every single trial, whether it's minuscule or whether it's immense. God wants us to go to him with our Lord Jesus Christ right in the front and center of our minds and in our hearts, and in prayer at every conceivable possible moment. As Peter says in his first letter, he says, humble yourselves therefore under God's mighty hand. He's able, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all of your anxiety onto him. Why? Well, because he cares for us. He cares for you. What other reason would there possibly be? It's one of my very favorite quotes. But when you look at that word anxiety, when you look at it, it's a pretty sad word. It actually means this. It's got the idea of dividing and fracturing a person's being into parts. In other words, falling to pieces. Have you ever felt so anxious? Yeah? That you feel like you're just falling to pieces. Well, God is powerful, and he is able to lift us up in due time, because he cares for us. But we have to trust him. Faith is absolutely critical in the context of whether God will work in our lives, because it says, without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God, for all those that come to God must believe that he exists, like what we heard last night, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. And the times in our life where we actually seek God the most are in our moments of trial, in our moments of suffering, and the moments where we confront temptation and sin. And so we are much stronger, therefore, when we are made weaker. Because when we are weak, then we become strong. Now, when James speaks about facing or meeting or encountering trials of various kinds, it's actually this amazing word. It's this word called peripipto. Peripipto, great word. It's like that Taribayuruchi peripipto in this case, which actually means to fall among, or to fall into, and to be surrounded by, or to be struck by. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you fall among, you fall into, and are surrounded by and struck by trials of many kinds. That's what it means. It's only used 3 times in the New Testament. Once here in the book of James, once in the book of Acts, and once in the parable of the Good Samaritan. And I want to start by looking at that little parable where Jesus tells the story of a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. So he's traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he gets viciously mugged, doesn't he? Viciously mugged by bandits. Now, back in the day, everyone knew that heard this parable would have known about this treacherous journey. In fact, this journey is called the Way of Blood. That's what it was called. It's called the Way of Blood. Because many people were actually robbed and killed on the Way of Blood. That's why it got its name. And if you traveled alone, you were traveling at your risk, at great risk. And yet, despite the dangers, the Way of Blood was this major thoroughfare for traders, for caravans, for military personnel, pilgrims. It was about a 30-kilometre stretch through desert. Starts off a bit calm, sort of nice, humid breeze that comes off the waters. And then it goes through desert and then rocky mountains and ridges and valleys. And bandits had a lot of places to hide in this way of blood. And as the parable goes, a man was traveling alone on this treacherous route and fell among robbers. There it is, peripipto, to fall among. It's the same word that James uses, to fall among and to be surrounded by and struck. And what do these bandits do? Well, they stripped him, they beat him, and they just went on their way. And they left him half dead, it says. Now, in this parable, Jesus uses the way of blood as a picture of the journey of life. It's really the well-trodden path that every single one of us is walking right now. And everyone that has lived has walked the way of blood. And despite the magnificence and the wonder of creation and the beauty of being alive and to just, or the beauty of being here or the beauty of going through a walk or wherever it is in the world where there's such beauty, what we must understand, as Professor John Lennox says, is that our world is a world full of beauty and barbed wire. Beauty and barbed wire. Because life has got its moments of calm, where we walk along the flat surfaces, where the journey is cruisy and it's very comfortable and it's wonderful. But it's also a treacherous road surrounded by deserts, valleys and mountain ridges. And along that road we encounter many and various challenges and difficulties, right? And some are big, some are small, and sometimes we see the challenges and the trials looming off into the distance. Sometimes we see them coming. And sometimes we fall suddenly into them and they just hit us for a six. And from time to time, our trials feel so sudden and they feel so intense, it feels like we've fallen in and among robbers who, for no rhyme and reason, have surrounded us and cruelly stripped us of everything we have and beaten us and left us for dead. And in these moments, we can feel totally isolated. We can feel totally alone. And we can feel broken to pieces. We all walk the way of blood. And some of us here know all too well what it's like to feel completely beaten up and ambushed by trial and suffering. The other place that you read of peripipto, and it's fantastic that you guys have built a boat, because it's in Acts chapter 27. But this time, peripipto is used in reference to a super dramatic shipwreck that Paul was in. And so in Acts chapter 27, we discover that Paul is this prisoner. He's on a boat with 275 other people. They're criminals, sailors, and Roman guards. And here, the way the story goes is, well, after several days of delightful, gentle winds, a cyclone hits the boat. And from that point on, it's a terrifying ordeal that leaves them completely shipwrecked somewhere off the coast of Malta. And in verse 41, we read that the ship fell into and was struck by a type of reef or sandbar, and falling into peripipto, a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the forepart stuck fast and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. They fell into a place that they could not get out of. They were struck, surrounded by the violence of the wave, and the boat was just falling to pieces. Not only was the boat falling into pieces, all passengers, their hearts were falling to pieces as well. Talk about anxiety. But here's the thing. They would have actually avoided this ordeal if they'd only listened to the wise counsel of Paul. And in verse 10, Paul advised them. He says, "Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only to the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. But the centurion, no. He paid more attention to the pilot and the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. He refused to listen to wise counsel. Instead, he trusted his own judgment. He trusted the pilot of the boat and the owner of the ship. He trusted in flesh over the spirit. And you know what? This is us as well from time to time. Sometimes we get ourselves into shipwrecks of our own making because we actually pay more attention to the inner pilot and our own desires and our own intuitions rather than just going to God in prayer at every moment and trusting in the wise counsel of our Father in heaven and his Spirit word. Our natural instinct sometimes is just to trust our own understanding and our own ability to sort of claw ourselves out of situations of trial and trouble, right? Proverbs says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. No, in all of your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. And speaking personally, I know if there's anything that I've learned from these studies is that I just don't go to God enough for wisdom and for guidance. And James says, the active prayer of a righteous person has great power. Great power. And our own understanding, our own intuitions just can't be trusted. Our choices, my choices, need to be tempered and steered by the power of God's wisdom. We know it to be true. And so back in Acts, the centurion, well, he thought he had it all sorted. I can sort of almost hear the centurion sort of scoffing at Paul, going, he wanted us to go that way. Tried to steer us in a different direction. And listen to verse 13. Now when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and they sailed along to Crete. Beautiful. If you've ever been to Crete, I haven't, but I'm sure it's nice. Crete, close to the shore. I was actually hearing a story. I won't go into the story, but Brother Andrew Robson was telling me about how he got caught in this. It was a beautiful sunny day and they got caught in a massive squall, and it was the most harrowing story. We heard it last night. So there we were. Nothing to worry about. The wind is calm. Things are good. 10 points to human intuition, 0 points to the wisdom of God. That type of attitude. But then this happens in verse 14. But soon, a tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land, and when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and we were driven along. So now it was too late. The course was set, and it was violent, and it was out of control. And there was no turning back now. Verse 20, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. They gave up. Their faith had jumped ship. Have we ever been in that place before? A place where we are on the brink of our faith giving up. Sometimes falling into temptation, which is not of God, leads to ongoing trials of our own making. It could actually be a moment of passion that leads to your greatest regret. I think of King David in this instance, or Samson. King David, a man after God's own heart, we know how he fell. He gave in to temptation, which was not of God. But it led to a sequence of suffering and discipline and trials where God was present. Sometimes it's an act of curiosity that we fall into, an act of boredom, and a little addiction that starts as a one-off, it just grows into a monster of your own making. A violent storm that you can no longer get out of on your own. A storm that seems to just sap your faith and threatens to deny you of all salvation. Sometimes we actually see the trials coming. We see trials coming, a storm approaching, and we brace ourselves for a turbulent ride. I'm quite terrified of flying. Julia knows all about it. I check all the weather reports before I, look at the wind patterns, world winds. I'm a control freak when it comes to flying, and I brace myself when I see the clouds approaching. But maybe the storms approaching are the stress of your studies, the pressure and expectations to succeed in a very competitive world. I can see how that could feel like a storm looming. The pressure to get the marks you need at university or to find a job that you think that you'll be able to do for the rest of your life, God willing. Maybe it's difficulties with waves of depression and waves of anxiety that you've experienced before that you know are coming. Maybe it's self-image and your physical appearance, and you compare yourself with others, and you look on social media and you compare yourself and you think, why don't I look like that? I wish I looked like that. For others, it might be about finding a relationship. Will I ever find someone who will love me and will love God as well? Do I have to look outside my community? Do I have to compromise? There's a storm looming. For me, sometimes it's lots of things, but I own my own business, and the financial stress of being a small business owner is tough. The bills are mounting, and you just don't know how you're going to weather that financial storm. You see it coming, and you go, God, I don't know how I'm going to get through. You've told me not to be anxious about these things, so I'm putting it all into your hands. And sometimes we have trials that come upon us suddenly where we hit a reef, we get stuck, and we've fallen into a trial. We don't know how to escape from the grief. We don't know how to escape from the anxiety or the pain. And you're stuck in a boat that's breaking apart by the wind and the violence of the waves, like the loss of a loved one. The dreaded result from a doctor's report. Maybe you're struck by a false rumor where 98% of people believe you, but 2% don't. And it's killing you. Maybe you're a young married couple and you both learned you can't have kids. Not naturally. Sometimes the human reaction when you hit a reef is for our faith to jump ship. Sometimes we can get so lost in the storm that we forget that trials are actually a catalyst for us to cry out to God to save us. But instead of crying out to the one who can save us, we lose faith and hope, because all we see are just the waves that are crashing about us, and we think the days of darkness will just never, ever end. And there's a prayer. Troubles without number surround me. My sins have overtaken me. I cannot see. They are more than the hairs of my head, and my heart fails within me. Be pleased, O God, be pleased to save me. Lord, come quickly. Lord, to help me. And we can always pray that prayer at any time. You can pray it right now. But here's the interesting thing. If the people in Paul's day had lost faith in the faith of Paul and they jumped ship like they wanted to, guess what? They would have all died. All of them. Paul says in verse 21 in Acts chapter 27, men, you should listen to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship." But in verse 30, it says that the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship. They didn't want to. They didn't want to listen to that. They wanted to jump ship. Their faith had jumped ship, and them included. But Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Do you understand that? So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I've been told. But we must run aground on some island. Our faith in God must ride through the storm and not jump ship in times of turmoil and struggle. Never give up. No matter how long the ship is stuck in those turbulent waters. You know, Paul says and it's in regard to temptation specifically. He said the temptations in your life are no different from what others experience. Don't think that you are unique in the temptations that you face. You're not. That's what it's saying. And God is faithful. He is faithful. We're not. We're not faithful like God is. God is the faithful one in our relationship. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, he will show you a way out so that you can endure. The men on the boat were tempted by their own instincts and desires to abandon their faith and completely jump ship. They thought they could not make it to shore by faith. They thought that they could make it to shore by faith in themselves. But we are weak, young people. I am weak. We are weak. We are not strong. But when we are made weak, then we are strong. It doesn't say that God will take away the temptation we are experiencing, but he will always, of course he will, provide a way out so that we can endure that. And sometimes, God knows at times it can be excruciating to us. It can be excruciating to endure that temptation specifically. Now, I'm going to tell you a personal story. When I was 19, and what I need you to do is I need you to, I'm asking you to be super sensitive about this. Because I'm very uncomfortable telling this to you. But I have to tell it to you because it illustrates a point. And it is something that I am ashamed of. Because it's important to illustrate to you the difference between temptation and trial. Because there is a difference. We read in James chapter 1, verse 13, that says that let no one say that when he is tempted, I'm being tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. If you're being tempted, it is not of God. God has nothing to do with that. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. And then desire, when it has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown up, well, it brings forth death. So what I'm about to tell you is a failure in temptation. God provided open doors for me to escape this temptation, and I failed big time. And yet I want to show you that despite my failing, that God, in his mercy and in his grace, was able to discipline me thoroughly and to refine me, even though it was never his will. It was never his will that I or any of us give in to temptation. Does that make sense? So not long after I was baptized, and I want to emphasize that, not long after I was baptized, there was a brother from overseas who stayed with us. Yeah, about 30 years ago it was. And he said, "Hey, I've got some marijuana. Want to smoke it?" I was like, "Oh, no. He goes, "No, that's..." And so I did. And I had a near fatal reaction to it. It's well documented, by the way, that things like schizophrenia and other severe mental illnesses, including panic disorders and anxiety, can be induced by marijuana. Now, I know that this is hard for people to hear, okay? Some of you, maybe you relate. I don't know. And so a fair percentage of people are actually vulnerable to it. They just don't know it. It's not a substance to play around with. And so at first I was okay. The waters were calm. The boat was sailing along just fine. But then, suddenly, like a storm from nowhere, my heart started beating so fast that I thought it was going to pop inside my chest. Tried to calm myself down as much as I could, just wouldn't slow down. Went on for hours and hours. It beat so loud that when I opened my mouth, I could hear it beating outside my mouth. It was amplified. And I was convinced that was it. And so I had this brother praying for me during the night, pray for me. And I was just too ashamed to go upstairs to my parents and tell them what was going on. All I could think about was the shame, the grief that I was going to cause them when they found me in my bedroom the next day. And during the terrors of that night, the only thing that was on my mind was for the sun to come up. That's all I could think about. If the sun come up, I'd be okay. And I think of Acts 29, verse 29 in Acts. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. That was me. All I wanted was the daylight to come. And once it eventually did, I was actually able to calm down. My heart started to regulate, and it felt like I'd weathered this storm. I felt as though God, despite what I'd done, had saved me. That's what I felt like. But actually, the storm had just begun. 4 weeks later, I was lying in bed, and I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard a donkey going, hee-haw. I thought, what? Why am I hearing a donkey? Why am I hearing this? And it made me panic. I actually thought it was Jesus riding on a donkey as he did into Jerusalem. I thought Christ has returned. That's what my mind said. And I thought, I'm not ready. I haven't come to terms with what I did. And my heart started beating super fast. I had this PTSD reaction, and bam, 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 bam. And I was terrified. I thought, I'm dying. Went up, confessed everything to my parents, to mum and dad, and to their horror. And my dad rushed me to the emergency room at Mount Barker Medical Centre in the middle of the night. And the doctor said, your son is having what we call a panic attack. Don't worry, it will pass. It was a PTSD reaction to this self-inflicted ordeal that I inflicted on myself about 4 weeks prior to that. And this calmed me down. My heartbeat returned back to normal. But then the storm pivoted. It became the northeaster. Because from that day forward, I had chronic panic attacks for the next 10 to 15 years. So bad, Julie will tell you, that I would have to crawl. I couldn't stay. I would be on my hands and knees. It was bad. And every time you have a panic attack, and anyone that's had a panic attack knows, you think that's it. And if you asked me the question, were there times when I felt like I was falling apart? I would say yes. Were there times when I beat myself up and told myself I'd never be in the kingdom? Yeah. Were there times when I told myself that I deserved what I got and for who I am? Yes. But here's the thing, as a almost 50-year-old, you are able to see the journey of your life with a certain sense of clarity. And if I could go back in time and reverse my foolish decision to do what I did, what would I do? What would I do? Well, guess what? We are not in a position to think like that. With God, it's all about moving forward with faith in His mercy and in His grace, because you cannot reverse the past. You can do nothing about that. It's done and it's dusted. All I know is that I actually needed 10 to 15 years of discipline and humble and tearful dependence on God. And if it weren't through the failings of a curious teenage experience, it would have been something else that God would have provided for me to have learned that. Because I know what I was. I know what I was. And I needed to experience the seriousness of life. I was a clown when I was younger, a performer, extrovert of extroverts. This taught me to get some serious depth into my life. I learned to value spiritual things way more than I did before, because I was taught to number my days so I could present God a heart of wisdom. God is able to convert human weakness into major victories. But the major victories in life are so different to the human experience. These are the major victories in the eyes of God. So the main thing I learned is to never jump ship. Might take you a day, a night. It may take you a month, or it may take you 15 years. Never jump ship. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you encounter trials of many kinds, because you know it in your hearts, that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Allow perseverance to finish its race, to finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete and not lacking anything. That's the point of enduring through trial. Do you want to be mature? Do you? Do you want to be wise? Do you? The Proverbs are so full of how incredible wisdom is. Who are you going to go to? A clown? You're going to go to a clown to solve your problems? No, you're not going to go to a clown to solve your problems. You're going to go to someone that's rock solid, like James, who learned through what he suffered. You're not going to learn from the clown. You know, when Julia and I got married, I'm not crying about that. When Julia and I got, how's everyone? Good? You're good, okay. When Julia and I got married, I left Julia hanging for 5 years in the dating game. Sorry about the sniffing. It was just too long, and Julia, it wasn't good. Julia, was it? And so I got married at age, well, I was a month off 30, so I relatively speaking, relatively late to get married, I suppose. And anyway, so Julia is a natural born mother. And so by that stage, we thought, we really want to have kids. That's what we really want to do. We'd love to have kids as soon as possible. But soon after we were married, we learned that we were unable to have kids naturally or easily. And so we thought, okay, thank you. We thought, okay, not to worry. Let's try IVF. That's good. And so we did. Sorry. One sec. That's gross. Is there anything no, all right. Okay. So we thought not to worry, there's IVF. And so we went through that, very difficult patch. So one year passed and no results. Year 2 passed, more IVF, nothing. Year 3 passed, more IVF, nothing. A year 4, more IVF, nothing. Year 5, more IVF, nothing. Year 6, more IVF, nothing. Lots of money, lots of tears. Issues of fertility. I know that some of you are young and this is maybe not so relevant to you, but just bear with. Issues of fertility in couples, you are 3 times more likely to divorce or separate. That's the statistics. And they jump ship because it's too much. Because everything narrows down to the baby that you can't have. The patriarchs of old, they knew all about it. Sarah knew all about it. Rachel knew all about it. Hannah knew all about it. Her husband appealed to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you so downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? But a bloke will never really understand how much a mother desperately wants and needs and craves a natural-born child of her own to just hold and love. And the times when it was impossible for Julia to go to meetings because she would go and there would be Sunday schools and our friends would be having many kids. And to see them with babies in their arms and to her to be without was very hard. And just when we were at breaking point, God saved us. He saved us from the temptation to jump ship. Julia fell pregnant with Charlie after 7 years of failed attempts. And here's the photo I took of Julia. I actually won a photographic competition with that. Ironically, in the context of noise-cancelling headphones. Think about it, yeah. And you know what's so interesting? I was talking to Julia about this last week. I said, when did my panic attacks end? They ended as soon as she was born. Never had a panic attack since. Because when you trust that God's in control, with all of your doubts and fears, it's impossible to want anything else when you experience the joy that comes through the end of your trial. You cannot know. You just can't. You cannot know the true value of what you have if you have not seen and experienced the contrast of what you do not have. That's the wisdom of God. And yet there are individuals who are grappling with a lifetime of trial. There are individuals in the past who fell asleep in Christ through the most painful and frightening circumstances you could possibly think of. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking, flogging, and even chains of imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, and they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world wasn't worthy, wandering about in deserts and in mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. We haven't been there. We haven't been there. These faithful men and women were just like you and me, flesh and bones. They all feared. They all felt pain. They all had doubts. But their trust in the faithfulness of God under such futile and horrendous circumstances was the only thing that mattered. Think of that faith. Think of how God views men and women like that. And all of them will be made strong in their next waking moment, because they will be changed in the twinkling of an eye. Mortality will be replaced with immortality. No more tears. And so James wants us to understand first and foremost that trials are unavoidable and inevitable as a fact of life. Count it all joy when you enter or face trials of various kinds. He's not saying if, he's not saying maybe, he's saying when you face trials of many and various kinds. So James doesn't want any of us to be uninformed. He doesn't want us to be naive. He doesn't want to be uncertain or naive about the absolute certainty and necessity of trials in our lives. And that's why he starts this letter off like this. And Peter reinforces the same message for us. He says, "Beloved, don't be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. That's not the mindset of a Christian, of a Christadelphian, is it? In other words, don't be shocked, don't be stupefied, don't be dumbfounded by this. Don't ever be caught off guard as if trials are some kind of a anomaly or rarity in the life of a believer. Have you ever considered that the trial of our faith is a way that God actually disciplines us? The writer of the Hebrews says, endure hardship as a disciple, or as discipline, sorry. God is treating you all, and me, as his children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? Fathers? That's a question for collective you. If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are not legitimate. You are not true sons and daughters at all. Have you thought about that? The difficulties and the trials that you face, that you endure, did you know that they're discipline from God? They show you, they prove to you that you are legitimate sons and daughters of God. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of spirits and live? They disciplined us for a little while as they thought best. But God disciplines us for our good in order that we may share in his holiness. That's what it produces. No discipline seems pleasant at the time. It was not pleasant to go through any of the trials that we experience. It's painful. It's painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. You know, as fathers, we don't always do the best job. Probably wondering why that's there. I was telling a story about discipline, and my kids were just morons, quite frankly. Now, most of the time the kids have got me wrapped around their finger, a little finger. They're just like, sometimes they'll get around me, and if they want something, they all do this sort of meerkat face, like that. And they go, Daddy, and they blink their, anyway, whatever, I just melt like butter. But not this time, not this evening. Rats they were. I got home, probably on a device, ignored me, and then Julia had lovingly prepared their favourite, which is baked potatoes with, all the good stuff in it. But oh no, Charlie and Frankie, they were at it. Olive was fine. And they thought, no, I want that potato. No, I want your potato. No, I want that potato. And I just watched this thing about a woman who lived at a time where they only had one pot of food. And if you didn't eat that pot of food, then it was curtains. Like, everyone knew to eat the pot of food and to not complain. And here my kids were, right? Oh, I want that potato. I'm like, Charlie, that potato is exactly the same size as that potato. Now give it back to Frankie. And she was like, on there. And then, anyway, I'm going back there. I'm just reliving this. Anyway, I said, good. Okay, now can we just get on with it? And then I see Charlie, she goes and grabs back the potato, and I went, I saw red. You know what I did? I grabbed that potato, and I just went, like that. I threw this thing, and, oh man, you should have seen this thing pop. And I said, now Charlie, go over there and eat it. Now, look, hey, you should have, she's like, oh, God, it's got hair in it. And, because we got 7 guinea pigs at home. There's hair everywhere. And, anyway, you should have seen the deathly silence. I was like, Olive was like, I love you, Daddy. It was great. All right, now that I've completely derailed this, I think the point is that we don't always do a perfect job. But, the interesting thing is that interjection has become legendary now in our house. And the calm that actually happens when you do get very serious, they actually appreciate it. Sometimes you need to actually draw a line when it comes to your discipline, and sometimes you need to cut things dead. And it created calm, and it actually was a good thing, even though I probably didn't do it the right way. It was very extreme. And so we just need to be spiritually educated. And this is what James is trying to teach us, so that we don't ever think in the midst of our trials or suffering that God has abandoned us in any way. It's actually the opposite. It's the opposite. Do you understand that? Don't ever think that God doesn't exist in your trials and sufferings. No. It's the opposite. God doesn't want any of us feeling left for dead and alone. He wants us to stop and call out to him immediately. That's why Paul great passage. James basically says here, blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. Amazing. Paul says in Corinthians, he says, I will boast the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, because God's there. In insults, because God's there. In hardships, because he's there. In persecutions, because he's there. In difficulties, he's there. Because when I'm weak, then I'm strong. It's only through weaknesses that we learn to lean on God. Does that make sense to everyone? Yes, it does. You'll be brought far more closer to God. An intimate relationship when you change your perspective on trial and suffering. Paul prayed 3 times that the thorn in his side, whatever you think that is, to go. Just get rid of this thorn in my side. He prayed 3 times for it. But what did God say? He said, no. No, Paul. My grace is sufficient for you. Because when you're weak, Paul, you are strong. So when trial and tragedy hits our lives, sometimes like a sledgehammer to our hearts, then and only then do we really truly learn the true value and meaning of what it means to have God in our lives. Now, where are we? James says this. He goes, as an example of suffering and patience, brothers and sisters, everyone here, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed, happy, who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. And that is the purpose of God, to show us the unfathomable extent of his compassion and mercy to us. That's what he's willing to show us, because he knows that when we actually believe in his complete love, his unfailing love, it will actually motivate us and inspire us to conquer every single foe that might come our way. And the last foe to conquer will be death, because he will gladly and he will willingly change our bodies to be exactly like his Son, immortal, incorruptible, and he will wipe away every single tear from our eyes. And finally, it would be wrong for me to not read this gem of verses. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us a new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. This inheritance is kept in heaven for you, who through faith are shielded by God's power until the coming of the salvation that is ready to be revealed in the last time. When will that be? And in all this you rejoice, you greatly rejoice, though now for just a little while you may have to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. You may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, and gold is worth a lot, which perishes even though refined through fire, may result in praise, in glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. He's creating some gold inside you, way more precious than gold. He's coming to collect that gold. That's what he wants. Though you have not seen him, who's seen him? No. You love him, and even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. For you are receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Problem is that we see the little while, our lives, as eternity. That is the problem. We see the little while as the long while. But in comparison to eternity, how does that compare? The little to eternity. And he's saying, just persevere, just endure, stay with me, don't jump ship. Because I'm going to bring you to a point of eternal life where the little while will be transformed into eternity, but an eternity of actual joy and love. Though you have not seen him, you love him. None of us have seen Jesus. Think about this. Remember the story of Thomas? Thomas said, I will not believe you, Jesus. I will not believe that he is risen unless I put my fingers into his hands and into his feet and thrust my hand into his side where that spear went. Jesus returns. What does he say? Go on, here I am. Do it. Put your fingers here. Touch me. And then he says these amazing words. He says, what you had to see to believe, blessed are those who have not seen, yet have believed. Now think about this. We live about 2,000 years later. Imagine if Jesus said, if the narrative continued, and he said, guess what? Guess what, Thomas? I'm going to show you what real faith looks like. There's going to be people Not 100 years later, not 200 years later, not 500 years later, not 1,000 years later, not 1,500, but 2,000 years later, there's going to be kids that are going to believe me more than what you believe me now. Now that is real faith. 2,000 years later, Thomas, there are going to be people that are never going to see me, and yet they're going to believe me with all their heart. Now that is faith. Do not ever, ever diminish the power of the faith that you have. Though you have not seen him, you love him. And we love our Lord Jesus, don't we? We love our God. Thank you.